Welcome, welcome, welcome to this English Speaking Union happy hour on Fubo Peace Memorial Park with Susan Moffat-Thomas, sponsored by the Colonial North Carolina branch of the English Speaking Union. I'm, as always, Joshua Keppel-Gonzalez, Director of Branch Services at the English Speaking Union of the United States. As ideas for these lectures come from you, our members and viewers, please share any ideas or topics for an upcoming speaker or talk using the survey that will appear at the end of our program. Before we get into that program, I wanted to take a few seconds to make a couple of technical announcements. There will be a dedicated Q&A section at the end of this presentation. To submit your questions, please use the dedicated Q&A and chat modules that are at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit them during any point of the presentation, but they will be answered in the order received during the dedicated dedicated Q&A section at the end of our presentation. I also want to take a moment to recognize the branches with the most registered members. They are Atlanta, Central Florida, and of course the Colonial North Carolina branch as well. Now, to really start us off today, I'd like to welcome former Colonial North Carolina branch president, Eleanor Kelly. Eleanor?
Thank you, Josh. I'm the past president of the ESU's Colonial North Carolina branch in New Bern. I'd like to kick off this special event by saluting our illustrious speaker, Susan Moffat-Thomas, with our happy hour drink of the day. It is called Island Comfort, and it is made with Pepsi Cola, which was created in New Bern in 1898 by pharmacist Caleb Bradham. The drink also contains Southern Comfort and lemon juice. Cheers, everybody. Susan served as an officer of our branch for 5 years and has a fascinating story to tell. Before she speaks, though, I'd like to tell you a bit about New Bern and show you some slides of our beautiful town. Go back one, please. New Bern was founded in 1710 by Baron Christopher de Graffenried, who named the town after his hometown of Bern, Switzerland. Bern means bear in Swiss German, and that is why you will see large hand-carved bears throughout this town. New Bern is located at the confluence of the Trent and Neuse rivers and is about 40 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. There are magnificent river views nearly everywhere in town. Next, yeah. New Bern was a major port until the early 1900s and derived its prosperity from coastal trade and some agriculture. It became North Carolina's wealthiest city after it was established as its capital in 1765. Tryon Palace, built in the 1760s, was North Carolina's first colonial capital and first state capital. Unfortunately, it burned down in the late 1770s and was reconstructed in the 1950s. Today, Tryon Palace is a major historic attraction. Next. During the Civil War, the city was captured by Union forces at the Battle of New Bern on March 14, 1862. It was occupied by the Union for the duration of the war. New Bern has 5 historic districts with architecture which spans 3 centuries. As you can see, it has many historic buildings and houses. In 1896, its coat of arms to New Bern as a symbol of the bond of friendship between Bern and New Bern. New Bern celebrated its 300th anniversary in 2010 with year-long festivities. The mayor of Bern, as well as other prominent Swiss officials, attended the celebration. And New Bern resident Caleb Bradham created Pepsi Cola, as I mentioned earlier. Who knew that today it would be a drink sold around the world and that it all started here. Next slide. Our historic city is recognized for its outstanding 40-year downtown revitalization program, spearheaded by the Swiss Bear Downtown Development Corporation. The city attracts many retirees because of its beautiful historic buildings and superb medical facilities. I'd like to end this portion of our program by showing you this picture of New Bern, an award-winning Main Street success story. The individual responsible for driving that success is Susan Moffat-Thomas. Now, I'd like to tell you about this extraordinary woman. During her 30-year career as executive director, Susan provided superb management and leadership of downtown initiatives for the Swiss Bear Downtown Development Corporation. This nonprofit led the successful revitalization of New Bern's historic downtown and redevelopment of its waterfront. Under Susan's inspired leadership, downtown New Bern became a widely recognized Main Street success story that has won numerous national and state awards. Susan continues to remain a highly active member of the community. She currently serves as a director on the boards of the North Carolina Aquarium Society, Carolina East Foundation, Craven County College Foundation, the New Bern Historical Society, the DAR's Richard Dobbs Spate chapter, and most recently, the Colonial North Carolina branch of the English-speaking Union. And all this after she retired from Swiss Bear. How does she do it all? Susan is a recognized community leader and has received many awards. Those she is most proud of include the Order of the Longleaf Pine, the state's most prestigious award, presented to her by the governor for her proven record of extraordinary service to the state. She was also given the Gertrude S. Caraway Award of Merit from the Historic Preservation Foundation of North Carolina, and received a recognition of award from the North Carolina Board of Transportation for contributions to the state of North Carolina. In addition, she was awarded the Alumni Achievement Award from Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. Originally from Michigan, Susan earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Christopher Newport University. Susan has 4 children and 9 grandchildren and is married to John C. Thomas. So now I present to you the very distinguished and accomplished Susan Moffat-Thomas.
Wow, I wasn't prepared for all that, but I certainly did have a great career, and I appreciate it, Eleanor. And I also want to thank the ESU staff, certainly Josh, who has always been there for us, Karen for chairing the committee for the happy hours. And also, I just appreciate all those watching that is giving me the opportunity to present this program today and share what I believe is really an outstanding example of Japanese Bushido, a moral code of samurai attitudes and lifestyle that are analogous to the European concept of chivalry that was extended by Japanese villagers to 34 Americans who perished in the final year of the War of Japan. This remarkable story was a learning experience that broadened my understanding of the war in the Pacific Theater, the bombings in that final year of the war, and the dedication of the Shiroishi villagers and the Japanese citizens who developed this peace park. I also learned of the work of the International Network of Museums for Peace, or the INMP, which was established in 1992. I also gained the friendship of Dr. Kazuyo Yamane, a second-generation survivor of the Hiroshima bombings. All of this led to my presentation of a paper Unforgotten for Generations to Come, which is on the Fubo Peace Memorial Park and was presented to attendees of the INMP conference in September of 2020 in Japan. It was a conference hosted by that organization and co-hosted by the city of Hiroshima, Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto, University of Art and Design, and many other universities and colleges in Japan. I'm sure you will find this to be an amazing story of brotherhood. And so with that, I will begin the presentation on Fubo Peace Memorial Park. And it is to the memory of the US crewmen and also to everlasting peace of mankind. Understanding the scars of war and hatred for an enemy's invasion of one's homeland runs deep. So it would be easy to believe the Japanese civilians who experienced ongoing, unrelenting bombings during World War II would be bitter and vengeful towards Americans. However, the humanity, respect, and brotherhood the Japanese extended to 34 American crewmen whose lives ended abruptly on March 10, 1945, is a remarkable story that I'm very happy to share. Next. It is a story I became aware of 3 years ago when a relative called to share information on a video clip of the dedication of the Fubo Peace Memorial Park in Japan. My uncle, Corporal Albert Donald Lutz, is one of the crewmen memorialized in this park. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps in his senior year of high school, shipped overseas February 9, 1945, and was stationed on Guam with the 19th Bomber Group of the 93rd Squadron. He died on March 10, 1945, when the B-29 he was on and 2 other B-29s crashed into Mount Fubo in the Zao mountain range within minutes of each other. After Japan's surrender in August 1945, the US Army brought the remains of the 34 crewmen and other World War II American veterans killed on foreign soil back to the States for interment. My uncle's remains with 2 other crewmen are interred in one gravesite in the National Cemetery in Grafton, West Virginia. Although I knew my uncle died in a plane crash during the war, I did not know any details, and my relative's phone call was the impetus to search the internet for information on that event and the development of the Fubo Peace Memorial Park. Resources include an article written by Ken Chakura, coordinator for the Australian Kaura Japanese War Secretary and president of the Australia-Japan Cultural Exchange Association on that March 10, 1945 incident. Robert P. Doerr's book, Mission Tokyo, The American Airmen Who Took the War to the Heart of Japan, and also a 2015 Asahi Shimbun newspaper article. This narrative begins in the mid-1940s when the war in Europe was winding down and the war in the Asian Pacific theater continued. When the Allies recaptured Guam, Tinian, and Saipan in the Mariana Islands in the late summer of 1944, they constructed airfields for B-29s based there so they could conduct strategic bombing missions against the Japanese mainland. The precision high-altitude daylight bombings that worked in Europe were simply not working in the Pacific. Washington was beginning to debate wholesale destruction of the Japanese cities with firebombs. The wretched and often unexpected weather conditions during raids, along with dropping bombs from high altitudes, were unsuccessful, and a new warfare tactic of flying at a low altitude and leaving the guns behind would change the war in Japan. The men, dubbed the 1,000 Kids, assigned to fly the first low-altitude mission to firebomb Tokyo, were sure they would never safely return from a mission. Mission Tokyo began on the early morning of March 9, 1945. Under the command of Major General Curtis LeMay of the 21st Bomber Command, 334 B-29s, or super fortresses as they were called, the largest force of bombers ever assembled without flying information, were launched from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. Their missions: bomb and destroy the heart of Tokyo. The super fortresses, loaded with E-47 incendiary fire bombs, each filled with 56 bomblets, would assault Tokyo with the untried and untested new tactic that required the bombers to firebomb the city from an altitude of 5,000 to 8,000 feet, not the usual altitude of 28,000 feet. No armada of warplanes in such numbers had ever been launched without flying information or flown so low. The main force of the 300 plus B-29 took 2.5 hours to pass over Tokyo, dropping nearly 500,000 of the M69 bomblets. It created an inferno of devastation that ultimately destroyed 16 square miles of the heart of Tokyo, with an estimated population of 1.5 million, an event that dwarfed the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. As the bombers headed home in the early morning of March 10th, 3 B-29s, 2 from Guam and 1 from Saipan, flying in fierce blizzard conditions, were 100 miles off course. 17-year-old Takahashi Hideo, who lived in Shiroishi village, recalled being awakened by the sound of a terrifying explosion. He opened his window and saw Mount Fubo turning red with flames as the 3 B-29s crashed into the summit of the mountain within minutes of each other. That morning, he was part of the police brigade from Shiroishi village that made the arduous climb in 10 feet of snow up the mountain, going to each site. With no rancor or hate, only respect for the young men who died, they collected the remains of the bodies and buried them in one massive grave and marked the site with a wooden post. When he learned the crewmen were part of the group that bombed Tokyo, his thoughts were of the military admonition: remember that death is lighter than a feather, and that it was only natural to go to a different country and die for your country. A dozen years later, in 1957, there was momentum among Shiroishi villagers to build a memorial to the 34 American soldiers who died on March 10, 1945. Takataro Soji, a former member of the Shiroishi City Council, led the effort. He formed a committee christened Fubo Peace to erect a monument to the American airmen. The significance of the monument being every human being is a brother, and the history of mankind is the history of war. However, it is not fate or inevitability. The drive, soon a national effort, raised 1 million yen. 4 years later, on September 23, 1961, a huge bronze plaque was inlaid into a massive rock at the summit of Mount Fubo. At the dedication ceremony, Lieutenant General Jacob E. Smart, commander of the U.S. forces in Japan, David L. Osborne, first secretary of the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, and City Assemblyman Takataro Soji of Shiroishi placed wreaths at the foot of the monument and stressed the friendship that now exists between two people who were once enemies. The plaque's inscription reads in part, "To the memory of the 34 crewmen of the U.S. Air Force B-29 who sacrificed their lives for their country on this mountain on March 10, 1945, and to the everlasting peace of mankind. Next. Next slide. Okay. On the day of the dedication, Takahashi Yoshio, who had no memory of the war, climbed the mountain, remembered being very impressed by the way his countrymen served those who fought it in, and remembered as a child being very grateful for the food and aid that was provided to his family by Americans. Over his lifetime, Mr. Takahashi established a successful construction business and was an influential supporter of the Liberal Democratic Party. In order to finish his life, he decided to fulfill a dream he had kept in his heart, to create a park for peace at a place in Shiro District, Miyagi Prefecture, where there was a beautiful view of Mount Fubo. In 2000, along with the landowner of that tract of land, Mr. Takahashi contributed 10 hectares of his own land and 50 million yen, and gained the support of Mr. Takataro Soji and Shiroishi Zao villagers. They joined together again to raise funds to construct a peace park at the foot of the mountain in memory of the 34 Americans and the 50 million around the world, including Japan, who died in the clashes during World War II. On August 2nd, 2015, beyond love and hate, 70 years later, the Fubo Peace Memorial Park was dedicated. Japanese and American dignitaries extended thanks to Shiroishi Zao villagers for their humanity and expressed hopes for world peace. The 60-acre site, planted with 3,000 Japanese cherry and American dogwood trees, has 4 major monuments. A smaller replica of the monument at the summit of Mount Fubo with the epitaph summarizes the events of March 10, 1945, with prayers for world peace. Next. A map showing the 3 crash locations. The bottom section lists the names of the crewmen, their age and position on each plane. A monument contributed by Carolyn Kennedy, United States Ambassador to Japan, reads, "May each of us ask what we can do to work for peace and goodwill." Next. 2 commemorative tree plantings. Next. Next slide. 34 individual cenotaph monuments, each with a bronze plaque, is engraved in English and Japanese, with each crewman's full name, age, position, rank, bombardment group, and the plane they were on that fateful day. Next. Next slide. The last paragraph of the epitaph monument titled "For Peace of Earth," for peace of the earth, engraved with the sentiments of Soshishiro Ito, Japanese Speaker of the House of Representatives, reads, "Finally, Mount Fubo, literally meaning unforgotten mountain, truly exudes the presence of a sacred peak, overflowing in compassion and benevolence. By its very nature, it affords comfort and consolation to the souls of the American servicemen who tragically met their end here, some 10,000 miles from home, while extolling the joys and hopes for peace and vibrant progress for the future of all who came here." Fubo Peace Memorial Park truly does overflow in compassion and benevolence. And as a family member of the crewman who died on that fateful day, I extend deep appreciation to Mr. Takahashi for following his dream and to the many other Japanese citizens who worked to ensure a catastrophic event was unforgotten by creating a place where children can pass on their stories and hope for peace for generations to come. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed hearing this remarkable story.
Well, thank you, Susan, for, I think for many of us here, kind of revealing a part of the history of the Pacific Theater that we may not know. And now, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, this is the dedicated Q&A portion of our presentation today. So if anyone has a question for Susan, you can use the Q&A or chat module that are at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Okay, this is going to be a challenge.
So Susan, I will go ahead and dictate any questions to you. I'm monitoring it right now.
Great.
Okay, so, well, not a question, but a statement from Charles Lumpkins, who states, "Thank you for your presentation." And again, you can use either the chat box or the question and answer module that are located at the bottom of your screen if you have a question like.
I'd like to say something. Can you?
Oh, please, Eleanor, go ahead.
I don't think it's muted, so you can.
Oh,
No, yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to make a comment on this story. When Susan first told me about it some time ago, I was astounded to think that the Japanese created this monument to the airmen who had been bombing Tokyo. I mean, it's just an extraordinary story of forgiveness and memory by Japanese citizens. And I think it's a very special story.
I will just add to that also. You know, I mentioned that in my research, I became aware of the international network of museums for peace. And I had never been aware of this before, but it's an organization that has members throughout the world. And it was amazing to me. I had, as I say, I was not aware of it, but to find out how many countries actually have museums that promote peace and also serve as reminders of the horrors of war. I thought that was quite remarkable. And even in this country, there are a number of them, but I don't think we ever, consciously thought of them as museums for peace. I must say, I think, world peace forever, I think is a noble thought, but I think we all know that that will never happen. But I am pleased in particular with my research finding out how many organizations really are promoting such things. And I know even when I was in Paris, I went to one of the museums and it had to do, of course, with the Holocaust. And I think, being reminded of the horrors of war is something that we continually need to do. And certainly we're being reminded of it right now with the current circumstances taking place in Afghanistan.
So we do have a number of questions that have come in. I'm going to kind of combine a few that seem to be kind of in the same realm. So from Sue Hartgrove, why did the planes crash? But I'll also combine that with Arthur Kurtz's question of, does anyone know how these three crews got so far off course? Because I believe they may be related.
No, I don't think they do. I think it's one of those things, you know, when you think of how vast the Pacific Ocean is, and even though there were 334 B-29s that took off with not information, a lot of them weren't even sure how they could really stay on course to reach Tokyo. But the conditions there, the winds and all, I think it was also at a time we didn't understand the weather, and a lot of the winds that we had to deal with in fighting that war. And I think that in blizzard conditions, possibly even with the B-29s, from what I've read, a lot of them, the radar was not very sophisticated, and there were a lot of issues with them. So, you know, one has to just think that they probably just were off course. The thing that was amazing to me is that three of them together crashed within minutes of each other in the same mountains, and this was about 100 miles north of Tokyo when they should have been going east. I have never been able to find the answer to that, other than the fact it was just one of those times when, you know, conditions were bad. They for that matter, you know, possibly even the plane or one of them might have been damaged, which threw everything off course. I just honestly can't answer that with any real substance fact.
So our next question from Alice Delana asks, are other members of the deceased airmen as interested in the story as you are? Does your interest come from your relation to an airman?
I have no idea. My interest came when I received a phone call from a cousin. I was, you know, I was aware of my uncle dying as a child growing up because I lived right near my grandmother, and he was one of the younger sons. And I do know that the family of one of the men who died in that plane crash also is buried or his bones or whatever the remains are interred in the National Cemetery in Grafton. I have not had any way to really research how the other families have responded, or if they're even aware of this. The only reason I became aware of it is because my cousin's niece lived in Japan, and she saw a clip of the dedication of the Fubo Peace Park when she was living in Japan. And so she called her mom and said, hey, you know, I think this has to do with our uncle or relative who was born or who was killed in the war. And when she called me, then I immediately, because I love to do research and all, I immediately really started tracking all this down because I really hadn't known any of the details. So I don't know if other families are even aware of it, because I have to say, when I go on the internet and tried to even find the Fubo Peace Memorial Park, I had a real struggle finding it. Now, because I presented a paper and some other things, when you go, you can actually find something on it. But before that, you really couldn't. So, you know, it was a fluke that her niece happened to see that TV clip. And I guess if other families may totally not be aware of it at all. But when you think those 34 crewmen, I mean, all their information is on each and every cenotaph. It's really quite amazing.
So our next question is from Charles Lumpkins, who asks, did the villagers meet opposition for establishing a monument for peace honoring airmen from an enemy nation? The Pacific theater of World War II was very vicious. Compared the Fubo villagers to Japanese government refusing to apologize to China and to Korea and the Korean comfort girls.
I don't think the Japanese have yet actually totally, as a nation, come to grips and apologize for the comfort women. I'm losing track now. You have to touch back with me, Josh, on some of the other points.
No, absolutely. It was a multi-point question. So
Yes, it was.
did the villagers
Yeah, I'm getting
meet
older.
opposition for establishing a monument for peace honoring airmen from an enemy nation?
Well, I guess that's why I think this is such a remarkable story, because I've also published this story in the News and Observer in Raleigh. And it was also in my hometown paper in Michigan. And a friend of mine, when she read the article, she said, Susan, if you were the one who wrote that article, I would say it was a big lie. She said, because during the war, and she was older and her husband was in the war, she said, we just absolutely hated the Japanese. And I think that, we all are aware of that. And I think that's what is so remarkable about this story, is that the villagers climbed up that mountain, in 10 feet of snow in ferocious weather conditions. And not only they went to each site, collected what's remains were there and buried them. And I think that was remarkable at that time. And especially when they learned that Tokyo had been bombed. It's interesting that whole concept. I guess that's why I was so blown away by it. I think the Shiroishi villagers, of course, the Americans after Japan surrendered are responsible for the infusion of aid and money and all, which is why the country was able to become economically strong again, and is the one man who led the second, the building of Fubo Peace Park. He mentioned in the article how grateful he was for their aid. But as far as the Shiroishi villagers, how they even, a few years later in 1960, when they went to raise the money, it wasn't only the Shiroishi villagers that raised over $1 million yen. It was people from all over Japan. So it's very touching to me how many of them must have reacted to the aid that we actually provided in spite of the horrors of the bombs that were dropped and all of that. I guess in the end, all I can say is the human kindness must touch the hearts of many, many people in many ways. I really can't explain more than that. I just myself, when I was doing all this research over these several years, the more I learned, the more I was just amazed. And I actually didn't find out till really late in my research, because I kept finding myself thinking, why would they do this? Why would they build a park, for millions, 60, however many acres and all? Why would they do that? And it wasn't until the lady that I became friends with sent me the article in which Mr. Takahashi was talking with the editor of the paper just before the Fubo Park was being dedicated, and he had said how grateful he was for all the aid that his family had received, food and whatnot. So I was absolutely thrilled when I found that out, because until that, I could not make any sense out of it either.
So our next question is from Jeff Schnabel, our Kansas City branch, who asks, do you know how many international peace museums are located in the United States and where they are located?
There are quite a few. I did look that up. I can't relate right now where they all are. They're not really, they don't call themselves like peace museums per se. But I know there are a lot of them. Again, my memory on that particular point, I can't relate, but I think if you would go on the internet and look up peace museums in the United States, you would find that there are many, many more than, I didn't even know there was any, quite honestly, before I started all this. I wish I could be more specific, but that's the best I can do.
Absolutely. So from Alice Delana, have Carolyn Kennedy's remarks at the dedication been printed? Or do you know what she said?
Only what is on that monument, and I'm not exactly sure she was there or she didn't send a representative. I never could see the clip. I don't know whatever happened to that. I'm just aware that she was there, or that she did through the, as an ambassador, that monument was contributed by her.
And I think our last question from Charles Lumpkins, what was the response of Japanese military authorities? Did military authorities inspect the crash sites within days or weeks of the crash?
I have no idea what the, if you're talking about right after the crash, I imagine that all of the calamity that went with the bombing, a firebombing of Tokyo, and then the continual bombing that went on between March into June, July, and August, I would imagine they really didn't give it much thought. That's just my thinking.
All right. Well, thank you, Susan, for taking the time to do the Q&A and answer the, I think, nice variety of questions that we got from the audience. And thank you again for taking the time to make this really interesting and I think very, very unknown piece of both World War II history, but also of the history, a history of peace and reconciliation. Usually at this point in the presentation is when I would introduce our executive director of the English Speaking Union, Karen Karpwich, who is unfortunately unable to join us today. So at this point, I'm going to once again thank you, Susan and Eleanor, and also the Colonial North Carolina branch for and also
I'm
I just want to
reading
mention
what
that Bob Husson, the current president of the North Carolina branch, said, very nice program and thanks for representing the New Bern and Colonial North Carolina branch. And I'd like to kind of echo Bob's remarks. Thank you, and thank you to Bob, and thank you to the Colonial North Carolina branch. Speaking of branches, the English Speaking Union is a membership organization. So if you're not a member and you'd like to become one, at the end of this program, a survey is going to open up that will allow you to join the English Speaking Union. Also, if you're a member already, but you haven't yet renewed this year, because we are in the middle of our renewal season, again, you can do that online, or you can also wait till a paper mailing shows up at your house. That should be arriving next week is the second round, so you should be getting that as well. I'd also like to thank our happy hour committee chaired by Karen Blair Brand, who has done the work and the coordination and communication with branches in order to find these really interesting and unique presentations that you won't find anywhere else. So with that, I'd like to once again thank you, Susan, the Colonial North Carolina branch, and for everyone for attending. And we'll see you in 3 weeks' time for Queen Victoria and the Victorian novel with Professor Engel, sponsored by the Shreveport branch of Louisiana. So hopefully I'll see you all there. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you so much again.
Hit leave.